it's something I didn't appreciate when I was at the agency and doing the defense contracting stuff. I was single, and or maybe just gotten married or whatever. But to your point, and I never really understood the sacrifice. Now, I have 2 young kids. I can't imagine leaving for 6 months. Can you imagine leaving your kids for 6 months and going? By the time I see you, you're going to be 6 inches tall. Kids, mine's going through a growth spurt. He's going from kid to man, if you will. And so I can't imagine leaving and missing that much. I mean, if I go away for a few days for a book tour or something, I feel like I've missed everything, and so it is a sacrifice for the people that do these jobs. And there's still, wars or no wars, there's people deploying, going out on ships and aircraft carriers and overseas, and so I think there's a debt of gratitude for the servicemen and women, and even for the CIA folks, because they do the exact same thing. Not all of them, but they do deploy, and they go to places that aren't safe, and do jobs that are you may not come back from. So no,
you have to go where the information is.
That's exactly right, and those aren't always the places you would take the kids on vacation, if you know what I mean. So. Yeah, interesting.
Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Life in Bomb City podcast. My name is Aaron Favor, and this morning I've got a special guest. Author Taylor Moore is going to be with us. Good morning, Taylor.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah,
good
it's
to be
pleasure.
back. Yeah,
glad to have you back. Yeah, so tell, what have you been up to?
A lot of writing. I guess since the last time. I can't remember what book it was, but 4 books out in the Garrett Kohl series, and I've got a brand new one that I'm working on. It's done. I'm just going back and forth with my agent now, trying to get it just right. And so, so a lot of writing, a lot of, on the book side, doing some screenwriting too, as always. So now I'm staying busy, man.
What is the screenwriting like? Are you doing stuff for the Garrett Kohl series?
Yeah, so the latest thing that I've been doing, I've been actually adapting the first book, Downrange, to a script. I've got a director attached, and we've had some interest from production companies, and we're kind of in that weird process. So I don't know. I kind of started the process of adaptation, and I might just pass it on and have someone else pick it up, because I'm about to get, once I finish this 5th book, I'll start a 6th book. So it's kind of just a matter of time. You only have so many hours in the day in which you can get done. So I try to, use whatever time I have to create something new. So since that exists, I like working on adapting, the books, but I think it just takes time. It takes some time. And I think I've got a good outline for someone who would pick it up and could kind of, the reality is what we're working on now is we're looking at maybe doing a film franchise. And that seems to be the interest. I started out a couple of years back, had optioned it to Universal Television for a series. It ended up not getting picked up. There was some interest from Peacock, but they had fully taken that on board. But I'd kind of learned the process of TV film. And so I enjoy the screenwriting part. But you just gotta. It's just so many hours in the day. So, but that's what I've been working on lately. Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah,
no, that's great. We'll have to talk more about the adaptation work here in just a bit after we talk about this last book. Yeah,
absolutely.
And then we'll kind of talk a little bit about maybe what the future, what you've got kind of unrolling here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, we've gotten. I think we did interviews for the first one, and we did an interview for the second one.
Okay.
We have not talked about 4, and I don't think we've talked about 5.
Okay.
But 3 either.
Yeah, 3 either. Okay. So we have a lot of ground to cover. That's
we don't have to cover all of that.
That's
just
good. Yeah.
Maybe just the new one.
Yeah, that's fine. So the latest one out was Cold Trail, came out in the fall. Cold Trail came out in the fall. They're actually going to do it in trade paperback. They've done all my books in mass market, the little ones that everybody sees. People reading at the beach. But the next one's going to be a trade paperback. So that sort of bigger paperback that you see, I think, are getting a little more popular these days. So that comes out in July. So for those interested in the paperbacks, that's coming out soon. So yeah, so Cold Trail, man, it's the fourth installment of Garrett Kohl. For those out there who haven't heard anything about the series, Garrett Kohl's a former Green Beret turned DEA special agent, and the first book, Downrange, it brings him back to the state of Texas. He's working on assignment overseas, comes back on a protective custody assignment, and then ends up back at his home ranch on this protective custody assignment. And the 4 books are really more based out of Texas, and so it's kind of him getting in these wild adventures that it's the bookends, or the series itself, is sort of a neo-Western mixed with a spy thriller. So I don't know if people think of it's sort of a little bit of Yellowstone and a little bit of Jack Ryan. So it kind of collides those two worlds.
That's a good combo.
Yeah, right. Not too bad. Right, not too bad. So so anyhow, so that's the series, and so Cold Trail is going to be the last one, at least for now. We may come back to it at some point. I actually am working on a prequel that I've been kind of working on a little while, and I think that would be fun, but I'd like to come back and pick up the series here later on after I do a couple others.
How far back would the prequel, if you conceptualize that at all, how far back would that one go?
Yeah, the idea with that one is it would be, from where Downrange is, maybe 3 or 4 years beforehand. It's when we're engaged over in Afghanistan, and it takes place over there, and it gets into some kind of trippy stuff. Again, Garrett's DEA, former Green Beret, so he knows that area well, knows the terrain, knows the enemy, but this gets him more into a little bit of the drug world and some of the weird stuff going on with the CIA and their involvement with what's happening. So Garrett is always kind of like playing catch up with the CIA. That's his that's usually what's going on. And for me, as former CIA intelligence officer, it's fun. I don't necessarily make us the bad guy, but I make us the guy that lives in that gray world. And for me, it was fun to write. Garrett's a sort of black and white, former kind of cowboy, grew up on a ranch from Texas, DEA, right and wrong, law enforcement officer that gets thrown into that gray world, that nebulous world that the CIA operates in so well. And so all the books kind of capture what he has to do in that world himself.
Right. Can you tell me, or tell our audience maybe what is it that allows them to be so good at operating in that world? Is it? I mean, it's not any type of like lone theory of psychology or any lone theory of anything else, but what is it specifically that, as an organization, because it's a huge organization, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess and I can absolutely cut all of this out of
no.
I'm going to mark it just in case. But I mean, that's something that I think is really interesting, specifically when you get into like a character like Garrett Kohl.
Yeah.
Because the most popular stuff that we see out of them is like people acting almost all by themselves with very little accountability and nothing else going on. Mm-hmm. And I'm not certain that's. I mean, it's not that that's not happening, but it's such a large organization. Yeah. That it seems like that would be really difficult to achieve. Mm-hmm. And I would just love to hear your thoughts on it. Yeah,
it's a cultural thing with the agency. It's weird because we've joked about this before that the agency, to get in, you have to pass the polygraph, right? So you have to. They take a group of people. Usually sort of the type A, top of your class, wherever you are, have done all these, to have that resume to get in. You've done some amazing things, and they take you in and expect you to lie for a living. That's what you do. You depending on what you're doing, like you said, it's a big organization. So you've got, analysis, you got the director of science and technology, you got all the support staff.
Human resources.
Yeah, human resources. You got all those things. But if you think about, I guess, the traditional spy tradecraft, that what the CIA is sort of known for is running spies. And that's what we do. And so the idea is that you're not doing that. You're not walking up to someone, for the most part. I've seen it happen where you say, "Hi, I'm from the CIA," but usually you're pretending to be. There's a little make believe there. So you take these people that have to pass the most stringent polygraph in our government, and you're asking them to lie. But it's not just done for the sake of doing it. It's done with a purpose, and it's done to keep the country safe. And so there's a little bit of training that goes along with this, that you live in a gray world, and it's not that there's no right or wrong. It's that you can't see the world for what you would like it to be. You have to see it for what it is. And to give you an example, and this is, I can tell you about something while I was there, and this was unclassified, but we learned a lot about Iran, and there's an expert that came in and talked about it. What was going on over there. This is a few years ago. And we talked about the nuclear program. And then basically he kind of laid out why they want a nuclear program. So you can look at that. And by the time he was done, I was like, oh yeah, I'd want a nuclear bomb if I was Iran too. Does that mean that they should have it? Does that mean that we want them to have it? Absolutely not. Does it help you to get into their understanding, get into their head and think, okay, here's their motivations? Absolutely. And so you start to see the world less how you want to see it and start to see things how it is. And sometimes it's, how could I put it? It's the world can be a bad, dangerous, and ugly place. It's not exactly how we always want it to envision it, but that's just the reality. And they train you to see it for what it is. So, back to your question, I think, like I said, there's a lot of different jobs, but if you're working in that world to recruit assets and look for the people that have the information that we want, it's not the Boy Scouts. It's an organization that is very, it's important to our national security, but it's not always the way you want it to be, I guess you'd say. Yeah.
No, that's a really good way of putting it. I think remarkable, probably way of thinking about the way that the U.S. has to do business. And I think business owners in general, small business owners, understand the need to be out there, kind of doing whatever you have to do in order to make it, to grow your business and to grow your organization. In this case, would be the United States interests. Yeah. And I think it makes a lot of sense from that perspective. It's not necessarily a question about, and this is why it makes it interesting for us to talk about specifically with regarding your books. Garrett Kohl has somebody who he kind of adopts essentially in the very first book from Afghanistan. Yeah. And definitely not a great backstory for the young kid. And but Garrett Kohl's kind of embraced this idea that it's a dangerous world, and you kind of do whatever you have to do to protect the people that you're in charge of. Yeah. And it sounds kind of like that's less than ideal. So certainly less than what you're talking about. Looking at the world as you want it to be versus looking at the world as it is. Yeah. Is that something that Garrett Kohl continues, is like a character arc that he continues throughout this last book?
It is. And I wanted to, how do I put it? I wanted to, as I wrote the series and had the different character arcs, I wanted to put this sort of cowboy right and wrong guy into the situation and see if it changes him. Does he change with the situations he's put in, or does the situation change to fit what he believes? And it's a little bit of both. I find him with a struggle a lot of times of do you do the right thing because it's the right thing, or do you do the thing that's effective because ultimately it's right, although it may be illegal. And Garrett always sort of balances, he finds himself sort of on that balance of what's right and what's wrong, and sort of operating off the grid a little bit. So I like to think that he doesn't push it too far, but he definitely tests the boundaries of the law, I guess.
Right. So George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, and this is something that just kind of has come up within our conversation. Yeah. They have both of them had made claims about the power of the past, and I guess this is something that Hal Brands writes about a lot. I think he actually has a book called "Power of the Past," the power of the past, and it's about realism and grand strategy and a whole bunch of other things. But George Washington, I think, said that he's worked hard to control events and not let them control him. Yeah. It seems like that's kind of the same type of problem that Garrett Kohl is dealing with. Yeah. But then Lincoln, almost 100 years later, says he feels like he's kind of failing because he's allowed events to shape him instead of him to shape events. And we talk about it collectively all the time. Anytime we get a new president, like, well, the president, the office shapes the man. Yeah. Is it the office that shapes the man, or the man that shapes the office? Yeah. And what is the role of personality in all of this? What have we learned about Garrett Kohl, or more importantly, maybe, what has Garrett Kohl learned about himself?
Great question. It's something, I don't know if I've really thought about that. and I almost hate to say, but you know, in the last of the books, there is a sort of like self, you know, where he contemplates what he's done and what he's given up to, for the sake of the country, you know, for protecting the country, and then in his own life. And I think that does come into question at some point. And, you know, his dad, not to give anything away, but his dad is always quick to sort of be the voice of reason. And anybody that reads the books, you go, well, he's a voice of reason. He's always says things, whatever's on his mind, good or bad. And so sometimes he says some things that are out there, but what his dad says is, I mean, without getting too far into it, maybe there's some providence here, you know, that, you know, everything that Garrett had done led him to that boy, to the boy he adopts. And so I think what Garrett ultimately realizes is that, yes, he had missed out on some things, and yes, he's gone through some hard times because of his devotion to service, whether it be within the Army Special Forces or the DEA, but it all led him to where he is in that moment. And so I think it's a lesson for all of us. I mean, we all look back on our lives and go, man, maybe I should have done this, or I should have done that, or made this move. And so we all second guess ourselves. And in the book, Garrett does that. But I think he ultimately comes to the conclusion that every life event, good or bad, whether you have a success or you make a mistake, it leads you to that moment. You just got to live in that moment and own it. And that's where he ends up.
Does he, and it seems like he's not necessarily the kind of person who would think about something like this, but maybe so. When you look back and you're specifically looking at second guessing yourself as a character here, is that the same thing as regret as a character for Garrett Kohl? Is he regretting when he's second guessing, or is second guessing, or it doesn't have to be either or, but
yeah,
is the second guessing a part of a larger regret? Is the second guessing just like a momentary thing, like you would have, I don't know, Eisenhower second guessing whether or not it was a good idea the day before Normandy to go for it?
Man, you hit on something that is a big topic of conversation in book 4. And it comes, and again, I never want to give too much away, but it comes in a conversation where Garrett is talking to one of his old buddies from the Army. And they were both part of something that I mentioned in the very first book, an operation that goes wrong. A lot of people died, and it was sort of, how do you come away from it? And one guy chose a bad path. Garrett chose a path that he basically says, I had to throw myself into the next thing. I had to throw myself into college, to a career. I had to just keep moving forward. So in terms of regret, yeah, I think there are things he regrets, but he ultimately moves on from it. And if I'm being honest, I think it's not something that he does overnight. And I think partially him working through it with his friend, he sees his friend who's in such a bad place, as a lot of people are that came back from, you know, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, whatever, end up with, you know, PTSD, a lot of, you know, regrets about things that happened, or, you know, survivor's guilt. Garrett sort of in working through that with his friend, sort of works through it in himself, because he's almost talking himself through it, like, you just have to move on, and there's nothing you can do. And so does he have the regrets? I think so, but I think there's a catharsis in admitting that things didn't go the way you wanted them to. I think a lot of times it's again, we can all do that and go, well, I did this, or I did this right, or I did this wrong, and I should have done it a certain way. Or maybe you make excuses for it, but even just own it and say, man, we did the best we could with what we had at the time. Could we have done it better? Probably, but we did our best, and that's all you can do, and you just live with it. So that's a big theme in book 4, and I wanted to, and it's not just for Garrett. There's a Kim, the CIA character that's in there. There's a lot of regret over Afghanistan. This book 4, I think, you know, if anybody's listening out there and they're a veteran of Iraq or Afghanistan, particularly, this touches a lot on that, about kind of what went right, what went wrong, and some of the feelings that people hold on to. And it's about, well, again, I never want to give too much away, but if you read it, for, you know, both the CIA character and the military guys, there's some sort of moving on and righting the wrongs that they never got to for years upon years. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Specifically, like not to give it away. I mean, maybe we could talk about it from the perspective of another historic event, like I'll go back further, like Vietnam, for example. Not that, obviously not. I mean, no equalization here. There's no. I mean, not at all. But I mean, if you talk, whenever we were younger in the 90s and 2000s, when you talk to people that were a part of Vietnam, talking to them in the 90s was different than talking to them, 20 years later, if we were to still be able to have the opportunity to talk to a Vietnam veteran. Yeah. Being able to visit with them about how now 20 years later or 30 years later, even after, their originally had a chance to kind of look back and try to understand and make peace with the past. The way that they understand it has changed. And I mean, I guess collectively our understanding of it has changed. As a non-historian human that loves government policy and political science, there's definitely a twinge of that in things like the way that we study, for example, themes in a congressional legislative session or something. But this is really a different type of series of events, and I guess I'm asking because what would like maybe a good equal to it be in like a Vietnam type setting? Maybe that's a terrible question.
So, is that a terrible question? I bet it's a great question. I don't understand it fully. Can you ask?
Yeah, instead of talking about Afghanistan, I'm wanting to talk about Vietnam, so that we don't give away any specific details from the book. That whole thing was just a setup for not talking about the book. So.
Oh yeah, well, I'm happy to talk about the book. So is your question? Do you think we'll view?
What specifically are they dealing with with regard to Afghanistan?
Oh, okay. So I think what it is. Okay, no, that's totally fine. I don't think. No, yeah, I get what you're saying, and I think how we left Afghanistan, particularly from the CIA's point of view. Well, you're going to see it play out from the points of view of actually three characters when it's all said and done, and there's going to be the point of view with Afghanistan. We left it. Let's be honest. We spent years over there, and we just handed it right back to the Taliban. And so that I don't care who you are, if you were involved in that or not, at the agency or the military, or if you're just an American citizen, you think, how did that just happen? How could we, after 9/11, how could we give it right back to the people that we took it from? Because they were kind of instrumental in what happened at the Twin Towers and Pentagon. And so I think people just can't wrap their minds around it. But if you were over there and you served and you lost people involved on both sides. So from the military side, these guys had, fallen comrades, and they just can't. Garrett kind of moves past it because that's sort of the cowboy in him to do that. It's kind of like the old lonesome dove, the best. Remember, Augustus McCrae said the best thing you can do with death is just ride away from it. And so that's Garrett. Sorry, I'm probably paraphrasing. It's probably not exactly the line, but you get the idea. Is Garrett?
I did that a second ago, just so you know, with George Washington. So
okay, yeah.
That's probably. I mean, somebody somewhere like there's going to be on the off chance that there's a George Washington person that's watching, right?
Yeah.
Just FYI. Yeah.
Same thing there, but the point is the same. Is that you just ride away from death. You just ride away. You just keep going, and that's what Garrett did. His friend wasn't so lucky. He was mired. He was got bogged down, and so he never could get past the people he lost over there. For Kim, it's a little bit different. And again, I don't think this gives too much away for anyone that reads the book. But the theme with her and the Mario Contreras character, a retired SEAL that ends up being in the CIA Special Activities Division or Center now, Ground Branch guy. He goes back. We're in his point of view too. I said 3 point of view, four points of view. 2 of these are the fact that they made allies with the Afghan people, and they promised them that they would help them, which they did, and they left due to no fault of their own. But they left those people behind, and their lives were horrible. The Taliban made it miserable for them, and they ended up losing family members, and they were punished. And they were sent into exile and had these horrible things. So for Kim and Mario's characters, it's not as much guilt about losing people. It's about having to to break a promise, a huge oath that we're going to stand by your side. And for the most part, the CIA was pretty good about getting all their people out. Somebody may listen to this and go, well, what about, whatever. We did, I think the CIA did better than probably the military. And it's not, I'm not making how do I put it? I don't want anybody to take that the wrong way. I think they just had the mechanism to get those people, and it was probably a smaller group of people. But at any rate, the CIA, for lack of, with all the movies or books we read about the CIA doing shaky stuff or sneaky stuff or things that are untoward or whatever, that was one thing that I will say about the agency, at least while I was there. There is a dedication to their assets. I mean, to the point where I witnessed a guy who was ready to risk his own life to get someone out at one point and wouldn't think twice about it. And so, going back to that culture we talked about with the agency, there is a dedication to the asset, to the relationship they build with that person, that partnership. And so we see that play out in Afghanistan. And so that, for Kim and Mario, that's their big thing, is that they had to leave people behind. And the people they left behind, and again, this not to give anything away, but they stayed on their, because they felt they had to. It wasn't that they weren't offered an opportunity to come to the United States. They stayed behind because they knew they had family and just didn't want to depart. And who can blame them? You have kids. Sure. I have kids. Would you leave your kids behind anywhere? I mean, no. I wouldn't. No, I wouldn't either. I would stay and die and fight and do whatever I had to. So there's some heart-wrenching parts of this story that there's just no good. It's sometimes things are just bad, and in this case, this was just a bad situation, and Mario in particular confronts it with one of the guys that was left behind, one of his Afghan partners, and they have a face-off, they have a confrontation, and they have a very hard discussion about what went down. And so I think for people, again, I would hope, I always tell people, I don't write, you've read my books, they're not political, there's nothing, I write for fun. I want people to have a blast while reading my books and just get lost in a world and turn the pages. I like to write page turners where you want to see what's going to happen. But I think I like to write stories with meaning as well. And so again, you've read them, so you know that the family dynamic and some of these things is an important part of the books. And so I would hope, and if anybody that's a veteran would read this book and maybe get some catharsis from it, that they read a little bit and thought, man, I've kind of felt that way, and I like the storyline here. I like this. I wish I could have that resolution that these guys get, or something to that effect. And I always try to write for people that have been there, done that. And one of the greatest compliments I ever had is a former SEAL from Texas. When he read the first book, he said, Garrett's journey home was my journey back home after getting out of the SEALs. And so I think I try to write. I do my best. I know I probably don't hit the mark every single time, but I try to write for that audience, for people that maybe had a vested interest in the wars or the particular kind of work that I write about, whether it's in the spy world or military world or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Now there was a former Green Beret. I'm going to mark this here.
Yeah.
A former Green Beret, I guess, who was was it December? Who had rented a Cybertruck in Vegas, and it exploded. Yeah. And there was a lot of hay as to what the motivation behind it having happened was. And I remember, I believe I was watching one of the Sean Ryan episodes there around that time, where he has a guest on that's talking about it, and they visit about what his job was, what his role was, what was he critical of U.S. policy and a bunch of other stuff. And that's not the point of talking about it. It's just he seemed to kind of be kind of an iconic example and a tragic example of that really difficult journey, to come back. Yeah. And I think specifically some of the things that he had discussed, I think in some type of an email, I think that he had maybe sent. Okay. And this is such an interesting story, and I don't hear about it anymore.
I know. It just kind of came.
I'd like to hear an update every now and then on what there may not be anything more revealed about the investigation, but it's fascinating. That some of the things he was critical of, had to do with what happened in Afghanistan, and not necessarily anything that's happening, here.
Yeah.
And so it kind of leads this question about, like, again, like the chicken or the egg, whether or not it matters, like if it's the events around us shaping us, or if we're the ones out trying to shape events. Probably a little bit of both, and all the time. But it does make you wonder, what is America? Who is America in the world specifically? As a force for good, what does that mean? Exactly. Mainly because a lot of our audience is outside of America. We have people, I think, from primarily from Thailand, Argentina, and India, and some other places that I think are kind of are notable as kind of being formally but presently. People who might be maybe starting to see a different side of the U.S. than it has in the last 20 or 30 years. Because it's being contrasted up against a different type of system. And I don't know why, but I mean, specifically with your books, I'd love for you to hear your comments or your thoughts on what that means exactly for Garrett Kohl, who's not just dealing with that, but also dealing with the current problems of the drug world, as America also deals with this problem, kind of in parallel to your world. Yeah,
that's a great question. And there's no sort of easy answer. It's complicated, right? Back to where you kind of started off with about the former Green Beret that blew up the Cybertruck. I don't know what happened there. That was an interesting deal, and kind of like you said, I read just like everyone else. I read the news reports when it came out, and he seemed like he was critical, but I don't really even know why, and kind of what happened there. I don't know. It was almost like a convoluted sort of. He had his own issues, right? And maybe I don't know this case, and so I don't want to speak to it too much. But maybe he just had mental problems. That does happen. That people get out and can't get it together and have mental issues. If you read book 4, Cold Trail, it kind of, not to go too far into it, but there's some parallels to the Cybertruck guy and some of the stuff that's going on in the book, because that does happen. People become disillusioned. I think there's no simple answer to your question, and I think as Americans, we all want to think that we're always doing the right thing and that we're, a voice of, a force for good and a voice of freedom and hope and all those things, but I think the world is so complicated and so hard. There's no one stop shop for fixing things, if you know what I mean. It's all so hard. I think for Garrett, since we're relating this all back to the book, again, he's kind of got that cowboy mentality. I think he sees things as white and black, right and wrong. But he, at the end of the day, as his art goes, I think he struggles with that. He always wanted to do the right thing, and realizes that although maybe he tried, he failed sometimes. I think what it all comes back to, and maybe of course, when you're writing a book, I've come to my own conclusion that I can't control anything. I can't control myself. I mean, you can for the most part, but that's as close as you're ever going to get. Because even when you have kids, you do your best to raise your kids and teach them right, but they're going to do wrong sometimes. That's just the reality. And your spouse, you can't control your spouse. I mean, at all, right? I mean, so they're their own person, and so I think there's a reality that Garrett comes to that probably I have too, is that the closest you can get is your little inner circle, your home. I look at my home and I think, I love these people more than anything inside these walls, and the most influence I have in the entire world is here, and that's not even perfect. For Garrett, his center of gravity becomes the ranch. He's back out on the Kohl Ranch, and that's his world, that's his universe, and I think he chooses to pull back from the entire world and focus on that and leave something. There's a history to that place, and it's grounded, and his mother's buried there, and they have family members that are buried on that ranch, and he wants to leave it to his son, so his son can leave it on to other people, and so I think Garrett realizes that the world is too big and complex to actually try to fix it. but the best he can do is manage his own little universe, which is right there on the Kohl ranch and his immediate family. That's what he tries to do. Of course, as a thriller author, I never allow that, because that would put me out of a job, right? So the world visits Garrett, unfortunately, for him, and that makes for entertaining reading and all those things. But no, I think that after having gone through these things, probably like a lot of us, the older that you get, the more you realize you have little control over the world. You realize that your sphere of influence is pretty small, even if it's, I've thought about this before. Even the president of the United States. I mean, you think the most powerful leadership position in the world, I don't care who's president, how much power do they really have? They can do some major things, but can they fix everything? Can they right every wrong? Can they, they just can't. And in some cases, they leave things worse off, maybe like Afghanistan. I hate to say, but I mean, we ended up. Hopefully, it's not worse off. I like to think it's not worse off, but with all the might and power and resources of the United States government, you saw how that went down. And so I think for all of us, I think it's a lesson in what you can do and what you can't do, and the realities of life.
Sorry, this is going to be a reference back to the movie The Dark Knight.
Okay.
There's a scene towards the end when I think the Joker is talking to Batman, and he says he said, "You don't know what to do with all your strength."
Okay.
And specifically, like he's saying, you need to do something.
Yeah.
And just because you can doesn't mean that, number one, you should, or it's going to make any difference. And that's, I think you're throwing that up against chaos, and I think that movie was released when we were kind of going through the most difficult part of the surge and the insurgency. Not that there's any one better part than another; it's all bad.
Yeah.
But the most violent years of the insurgency in Iraq is the kind of the parallel for that story in the context that it emerges from culturally. It's interesting too, because as you just now mentioned, what control does a single individual actually have?
Yeah.
So I think both of us are former readers of Stratfor, if not
love
current. I guess that's not even around anymore.
Yeah.
But rest in peace. I think it's Rain.
Yeah,
now.
I love Stratfor.
I'm sure it's great.
Yeah.
But Stratfor, their former CEO George Friedman had been on the record talking about the power of personality. Specifically, like, what does it mean? And if you're thinking about like a Marxist or a communist system, and you're thinking about like a Republican style of government, not Republican like a capital R, the formal old Greek version. I just always have to make that.
I know, no, I do. Yeah,
it's like, hey, I mean, what'll happen is the algorithm on here will find that word, single it out, and so I've always got to like make sure that I'm covering that angle. It's true. But in that interview, he is discussing that. I think he's getting ready to go to Russia. And they're talking about what is the power of the Stratfor Intel model, and what is it exactly that they do that other people maybe don't do. And he was always talking about how geography kind of dictates outcomes to people. And I was like, that's a really kind of a material determinist perspective. And like when you think about it from that vantage point, I mean, it does miss things.
Yeah,
is the thing. It does miss like maybe things where people do have an opportunity to make a difference here and there. But what he's saying, I think, and my understanding is that that people on the ground will always tell you something different if they think that they're going to benefit from having something different to say.
Yeah. And
that can be a problem, as we were talking a minute ago about the issue of, I guess, whether it's being able to be honest with yourself. For again, Garrett Kohl and his friends and his small circle of comrades and buddies, and trying to deal with all of the tragedy and circumstances that they've dealt with on behalf of the country. And I mean, that's the point is, I mean, especially in the case of like, some of the difficulties of people coming home, figuring out how to communicate with those individuals, and allow them to or get them to feel the gratitude that you have, right? I mean, because I think by and large, most of the country feels an extraordinary gratitude without being able to even express what it is that they're grateful for. Yeah. Except that, for me, when I started having kids and I started to realize that I can't imagine being away from them for a year and a half or a year at a time and missing all this development, all of this memories and just even then it makes you not really want to have to make any type of sacrifice that's going to take you away from them.
Yeah.
And so when you hear about the individuals that have been away from families for 2, sometimes 3, 4 tours, sometimes back to back, and sometimes, the idea of having to leave after having been home, and leave again, it just sounds, it required a lot of determination and a lot of, I think, what you said a minute ago, like what the agency has, specifically, which is, a real dedication to the common good, and not just to your own personal family. It always also speaks, I guess, to the wider group of family members. Yeah. There's not really a question in there now that I've said it. I think I was just
No, I hear you. No, just to add on to that, it's something that I didn't appreciate when I was at the agency and doing the defense contracting stuff. I was single, and or maybe just gotten married or whatever. But to your point, and I never really understood the sacrifice. Now, I have 2 young kids. I can't imagine leaving for 6 months. Can you imagine leaving your kids for 6 months and going, by the time I see you, you're going to be 6 inches tall? Kids, mine's going through a growth spurt. He's going from kid to man, if you will. And so I can't imagine leaving and missing that much. If I go away for a few days for a book tour or something, I feel like I've missed everything, and so it is a sacrifice for the people that do these jobs. And there's still, wars or no wars, there's people deploying, going out on ships and aircraft carriers and overseas, and so I think there's a debt of gratitude for the servicemen and women, and even for the CIA folks, because they do the exact same thing. Not all of them, but they do deploy, and they go to places that aren't safe, and do jobs that are you may not come back from. So no,
you have to go where the information is.
That's exactly right, and those aren't always the places you would take the kids on vacation, if you know what I mean. So
no. So I've just finished a project about for my own grad work, and there's like a twinge of good and bad in it. And I'm sorry, I'm going to kind of go off topic here for a second, because I think it will drive that point home, which is to say that, like, on one hand, there's the side of it that I think is probably academic. I think you and I have had a couple of off podcast conversations about what that encompasses and what it entails, and maybe how it's different, even because you're working with a set of knowledge that's more theoretical and more hands off, and not really. It's like being able to do surgery without ever getting your blood on your hands. You know what I mean? It's like, that sounds impossible. And so for a real surgeon, that's a ridiculous comment. You absolutely have to have your hands involved in the situation, I guess, unless nowadays there's robots involved and stuff. But,
that analogy went out the window.
Just another thing. But on the other hand, there is a certain level of maybe understanding and comprehension that you can get from not having your hands right in the middle of it all the time. It does kind of mess with maybe the perspective of gratitude, though. And specifically, like the project that I just now finished was specifically about money laundering, right? And specific in the U.S., whether it's the U.S. or Mexico or Latin America or any other type of place where there's a tremendous amount of investment, and there's also this other side of it that's like there's a lot of fraud, and that the perspective, or trying to understand, why an individual would choose to only do that, like have that as their business model, like this is what I'm choosing to do. Become an expert on is moving money for this one group of bad people and moving it to another group of bad people, specifically to see what kind of profit I can turn. Maybe on one hand, that type of individual is kind of difficult. It doesn't mean that person, though, that individual could also not be a positive influence within their small circle of circumstances, though. And this is so hard for me to understand as a human being. It's something I dealt with certainly in that paper. Because I was trying to wrap my mind around why anybody would put their family at risk over something like this. I know. And it just doesn't make any sense to me. So in this instance, they're moving money from the dirty money from drug cartels.
Yeah.
Cleaning it by sending it over using money service apps and money exchange services to China, and then China sending it back with a little bit of a more clear. And this is well documented stuff. It's stuff that the Treasury has worked on tremendously and done a lot of really good things and important jobs to try to isolate those individuals, and the financial services that are allowing those. Yet they're still somehow. I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss. Because in one hand I want to be able to say that there's still hope in a situation where we can not just stop it from happening, and yet what I'm trying to say is I don't know that we can stop it from happening.
Yeah.
The most powerful country in the world.
Yeah.
We don't know what to do with all our strength.
Well, it's interesting, and I've told this story before to people, but I remember I was part of the drug war. You hear about the drug war. I was part of it. And I remember I was working with the military, and I was sitting in this big room. I don't know, it probably fit 70, 80 people, soldiers usually in it. And I was sitting there thinking about cocaine, because this is something that we were looking at. And, from the time it grows up and we're looking at Colombia to making it through, triple canopy jungle with, FARC guerrillas and, getting into, a place like Panama, and then it's got you got a paramilitary force there trying to kill these guys, and then it would get on a semi-submersible vessel. Who would ever do this? Like a half submarine thing that those things sink all the time. And then it gets into maybe Guatemala or somewhere, and then you have a rival cartel there that's trying to chop your head off, and then it gets to Mexico, and you got all the other problems. Then you got the border, and I thought people want to do cocaine. I mean, I hate to say it that way. It's like we've got to quit doing cocaine. I mean, it just is what it is. I mean, this isn't like this thing. It's like a coconut tree, and you have coconut. I mean, it's just falling off. I mean, it is hard to get that stuff here, get it processed, make it through all the. So the answer. And I remember a friend of mine that worked for the agency, and him talking about with the Mexican government, like, what are you going to do about your supply problem? They said, what are you going to do about your demand problem? And he said that it was a hard thing to argue. It was like, if we didn't do cocaine, we wouldn't have this problem. They wouldn't have a problem. They wouldn't be dealing with all the horrors. So it's kind of an end user thing. You can be mad at these people, but at some point we got to not do drugs. We've got to change our culture to where. And will that ever change? I don't know.
No, but I think you touched on the really important part, which is that's a part of the drug war that America hasn't necessarily totally wrested from its hands yet. Which is, I mean, the demand side. On one hand, I mean, there's the side of it that's medical, certainly, and there's the psychological component, all the addiction stuff. That's all real and poverty driven, and a bunch of other stuff, right? But then there's also the part that has. The demand also can cause and is causing lots of violence, not necessarily even in the U.S., but other places that that's kind of out of sight, out of mind. Not because we're bad people, we're not. But I mean, it's just because it's in another place.
It is, and for all how do I say this? If you're here in the United States and you think, peace, love, and drugs and all that. Sure, but when you worked in my business and you see these little villages in Guatemala, rival cartel come in and chop everyone's head off because they let the wrong cartel come through there. There's no peace in that. There's no love in that. There's no fun and good times. And so I think you're right. People are so far removed from it here. They think, well, who cares? And I'm only hurting myself. You're not. I'm here to tell you you're not. People are getting murdered and tortured, and horrible things are happening to people because you're doing drugs. So it is what it is. I mean, I don't know how to convey that to people to where they would. I mean, what do you do? Do you change the culture? Is there a science-based solution? There's people that say you should just legalize it, and then that would probably help. I don't. There's obviously that's all sorts of problems with that.
And I feel like it's only going to get darker as we kind of move forward. The ability for people to use things like AI to create, and for lack of a better term, smarter drugs or smarter illicit drugs. And for the fact that those systems are are becoming affordable for somebody working out of a garage, or a lab out in the middle of nowhere, it's kind of a terrifying type of thing where you can actually, the idea of somebody being targeted because their genetic makeup is a specific, you know what I mean? That's and yet that's the reality of the world we live in. It's not going away, as you mentioned. It may be only getting, in some ways, more complicated. But I do believe that there are people like Garrett Kohl, Kohl's character, who are pushing back against it, and sometimes that's all we can ask. And so I think that's really a really cool part of your book. And how exactly do you expect the adaptation to play into the way that Garrett's character arc has been throughout the series?
So the way we're adapting it, again, at first when it was optioned, as a TV series, you can kind of get more into it. As a movie, you kind of just got to jump right in. And so the way this is the way we're looking at now, and with the director I have attached, we're looking at more. It's kind of more action adventure, a little bit more of a maybe, for a lack of a better way of putting it, like the movie's Taken, the Taken franchise. So here you have this. A guy trying to do the right thing, something horrible happens, and he's got to use this skill set to get the person back, or one of those kind of deals.
And what a great franchise!
So the art, isn't it a great one? Yeah, because we can all relate to the Taken. If you got a kid, you'd do anything to get them back. And
what was the one with Keanu Reeves? By the way, it's like kind of the same idea. Something bad happens, and then it's all. He's an assassin, I think, in the movie.
So it's not John Wick. Oh, is it John Wick? Yeah, John Wick. Yeah. So I haven't seen all of those, but the first one, something bad happens, and I won't give it away for anybody. Yeah. I'm one of those.
The first one, you can watch them out of order, and they're still good.
They're still good. They're still fun.
The third one, I think I watched a couple of years ago, and it was
how great is that? How has that guy never aged? I don't understand. There's a few of those that
he's different. He's like Neo.
He's like Neo. He really is. But kind of like it'd be the same as a John Wick kind of a deal. So there's not a lot of room for some art, but I do want to keep it, and I do. I think if you want to just sort of for the movie, the way it'll be adapted is that Garrett is a guy that's done his part. He's served his time for his country, and he just wants to be left alone. He just wants to be left alone, and he just wants his family to be safe, and he just wants to live. And again, as a thriller writer, I can never let that happen because I'm out of a job. So poor Garrett will always be in jeopardy, as will his family. But that's just how it is. But yeah.
Also the James Bond franchise recently. I think we had the end of a different James Bond.
Yeah.
It's not sorry, same track as John Wick here. I'm trying to drive it to something a little bit larger.
Okay.
James Bond at the very beginning, I think that people of the last one, which is with Daniel Craig.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Specifically for me, somebody grew up watching 007 movies, the 7 Days of 007, you remember, on TBS?
Yeah. It always come around finals when I was in college, and somehow I'd go like, how am I going to study whenever I could watch 7? Yeah.
For me, it was always opting out of basketball games in junior high and high school.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Instead of going out here where all the community was, I was always coming back and watching, being enthralled by this person who's actually gone to stand in history against the grain.
Yeah.
It's always fascinating. And yet, so you get to a place in 2005 or 2000, whenever the very first Casino Royale comes out, and Daniel Craig's character is able to somehow do something kind of new with James Bond. And even then, he's all the things that you expected out of James Bond, but it's just a new twist that a new character is able to put onto it.
Yeah.
And so by the time we get to the very last one, just a couple of years ago, was No Time to Die, I think. I thought that movie was phenomenal.
Oh, okay.
Not just the bad guy was super evil, but everybody else that played in that, whether it was his kiddo that he found out he had that he didn't realize he had, his girlfriend or wife, I don't really know what she was to him.
Yeah.
But he ends up giving his life for his family.
Yeah.
And as far as country, it's just a fascinating. Because he comes off as a dedicated person. Yeah. And yet somehow at the same time extremely selfish.
Yeah.
Right? And yet that conflict is real. And I remember towards the end, of course, Hans Zimmer did part of the soundtrack to it. I mean,
of course, it's amazing.
Of course. So you got it, by the way. Do you have any power or influence over who gets to do the score? Could you get Hans Zimmer to do it?
That would be pretty incredible, because anything, the movie could be horrible, but if it's got a Hans Zimmer sound, it's going to be good. You're going to be into it somehow. But no, I don't know. I don't know about that.
No, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
Does he have children? If he does, maybe that would be.
Right. Yeah. There's this nice spin-off there.
Hans Jr.
Yeah, Hans Jr., yeah.
But anyway, so that towards the end of that series, though, my point is that, you learn something about him that, I know it's a fictional story. Yeah. But there is truth in that. Yeah. The conflict is real in the human being, and it's not always so clear as to why somebody is seemingly doing something, but it seemed to be something that resolved itself over time. And I don't know, I think that makes sense, and maybe the sense of like the adaptation. I'm looking forward to getting to see what happens with it, and how Garrett Kohl's character kind of resolves all of the conflict, over a period of time, especially visually. That'll be neat.
Yeah, I think it'll be fun too. So.
Yeah, and hopefully get even a wider audience for Garrett Kohl's story.
That would be nice. Yeah, because a lot of people, even around locally, and it's the setting is local. I've run into people all the time. I've never heard of this, and so but as soon as I get emails all the time from people like, oh, I just found your books and now I've read all 4, and so. But I think that's the hardest thing as an author is getting the word out to people about the books, because it's usually when I tell people about the story, people are pretty excited about it, and like I said, they'll read it and let me know, like, hey, I heard about it, read it, now I've read all of them, when's the next one coming out? And so it's just getting the word out, and there's a lot of noise these days. It's not like the old days where you had like a few books coming out here or a few movies coming out here. Now, how do you separate from all the information that's out there? It's hard to do, and even with social media and everything, that's nice, but it's a lot to take in, all the different platforms, and just a constant, so I don't know how to get the message out, but a movie's a good way to do it. I think people see that and they'll be like, okay, this looks like something I might be into.
Yeah, for sure. And the first 2 books, I thought that, and especially the first 2 books, I thought your writing is just every bit is good, if not better than The Gray Man.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah. And
I can't say the others. It's because there are a lot of Gray Man books that I haven't read, and I'm sure they're all pretty fantastic. Yeah. Another question that I have for you, and the reason I say that is because they're popular books. Yeah. Right. And widely read, and I feel like that's something that every Texan should be a part of.
Yeah. Thanks.
So, what are you working on now? Once you're done?
So now I'm switching gears a little bit. My publisher asked that I try something new, and so I am. And so it's a little bit different. I was kind of how do I put it? The Garrett Kohl books were very comfortable for me. Because I sort of knew, I had that storyline going, and there's a little bit of a formula to it, and I kind of knew where all the characters were going. And again, I'll come back to that someday, but they wanted to do a little change, and so I ended up doing something that's slightly different. It's still in the military spy world, but I switched locations. It's going to be set up in the Chesapeake Bay area. But one of the things that I always thought was interesting when I was at the agency were all the little secretive locations that, we'd go do training, or you'd see something and it'd be out in the countryside and you see a couple of guys with automatic, semi-automatic weapons, up at the front gate, and you're like, well, this looks weird for a little building out in the middle of nowhere. What's up? What's going on there? I always thought that was fun, and I'd go out and do training in places like that, and it was always neat. And so I thought, that's something that I try to write about, things that nobody else is doing. And so in this one, I venture off into that. So I get into it. It still falls into the thriller category, but maybe a little more into speculative fiction. So for those, if they're fans of Blake Crouch, Dark Matter, for those who read or seen the show, or maybe Andy Weir, who did The Martian, it's what my agent calls 5 minutes into the future. So it's not really sci-fi, but it's where are we? We can kind of imagine where we're going. So this one gets into the AI stuff and gets into almost into the paranormal world, of string theory and all these things. So it's a little science meets paranormal, and it's a little mind bendy and all that. So it's going to be a fun one. I think people that like the Kohl series, if you like my style, and for people that have read my books, I don't really waste a lot of time, right? I mean, you've read them. I kind of jump right in. You get in the action. I give you a hook really quick about what's happening. And then I sort of jump right in, and then I sort of back build. I'll sort of build a story back where you're like, oh, this is who this person is. But I kind of like to get the ball rolling fast, and I do that in this new book. And so I think for those that like that style, quick pace, and I like to say that I write character-driven thriller novels. So I like. I want to write a good story, but I always feel like a story, it's got to be really, really good for you to love it if you don't love the characters. And there are authors who can do that can write despicable characters that you still follow and want to see what happens to them. But I like to hook the reader in with people that you want to root for them. You want to follow them. You want to see what they're going to do. You want to make sure that they make it in the end. And so this book falls into that category. So, I think there's good timing. It gets into some of that CIA military government stuff where, people are looking at the UAP, UFOs that people talk about, or the drones that we all saw up and people are asking questions now. You see these F-18 pilots seeing these UAPs, and nobody seems to know what they are, these weird things that are beyond our technology. So there's a lot of wild speculation that it's either aliens or it's time travelers or it's our government's technology that somehow has gotten out and gotten loose. And so I think there's a lot. I think there's a hunger or thirst, or however you want to put it, for that kind of story. And so I'm going to start telling some stories like that about what is our government doing, And so again, obviously, I don't disclose anything classified. My books all go through the CIA's pre-publication review board, so there's nothing classified. But I think it's fun to speculate, and particularly having worked there, I can take the reader on a little bit of a journey that's beyond your average writer, because I've kind of been there, done that. I know about those secret locations because I've been there. So do I reveal anything secret? No, and I wouldn't. But I think there's enough in open source now of just some fun things that people are asking questions and want to know, well, how far, what level of advancement has our government achieved, or how have they achieved it? Did they really recover crashed UFOs? And so again, this next book isn't about UFOs, but I just use that example as to what's that next level, what's behind the curtain, and I think that's fun for everybody.
Right. I mean, that sounds like it's going to be so much fun. Yeah. There's a million different things I think I can't wait. I'm looking forward to getting to read them.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it.
It's great. I think that I could probably visit with you some more about
for sure.
all this stuff. But it's been about an hour. Can you believe that?
Yeah, no, it flies by.
I don't know how some of those hosts, like for example, some of the more popular people on Facebook, on YouTube, they do podcasts that are 3 or 4 hours.
I listen to them. I listen to them all the time, and I'm the same way. I'd need a break and a lunch, and
I guess they take breaks.
Yeah,
but at the same time, I just don't know how they. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. They're good hosts. They're better than I am.
No, you're a great host. You're a great host. You're right there with Sean Ryan and Joe Rogan and all those guys.
Yeah, right. I'm more like the Chris Farley version.
The Chris Farley. Everybody loves Chris Farley. Nothing wrong with him, man.
You remember the he's always, the only thing that he knows how to ask is, do you remember when?
Yeah,
that's. You remember when you were with the Beatles?
Yeah,
I remember that.
Yeah, that was a great bit.
Anyway, okay. Well, thank you very much for being here with us.
Appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure to get to see you and to hear what you're up to.
You bet.
And please come back.
I'll come back anytime.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
I wanted to go. Yeah.